We're going to talk about some stuff to do with UI, user interface, graphical user interface, whatever you want to call it, because it's a very important part of your game, most likely. And there is a lot of depth to making UIs, and we're not going to get into all that. We're just going to go over the basics today. You've already seen me do some UI stuff if you've been following this entire tutorial series from the start, and that's when we did the whole button thing at the very beginning when I was showing off how to code. Today we're going to go into that a little bit more. So the way you make a UI in Unity, you start by adding a UI element here, and we're going to add a canvas. And you'll be able to see there's a couple of lines added here, which is really weird. Well, if we double click that, you can see that this is how big the canvas is. In my opinion, honestly, this is a little bit annoying the way it works with the canvas just existing in your scene instead of being a separate asset. There's nothing much I can do about it. This is how it works. The upside to this is because it's a game object in your scene, it's very easy to make references to other objects. And in this canvas, we can just put anything in this UI tab. So if we want to put in an image, we can put in an image. And in that image, we can put in any sprite. I've got a sprite of a key here. We can just put that in. And now we have a UI element for a key. Let's put that here at the bottom left. And now if we open the game, we can see we have an image of a key in the bottom left. And objects on your UI, just like any other objects in your game, can have a bunch of components. You'll note it has a rectangle transform rather than these game objects which all have a normal transform. And that's because it needs to be aware of how to rescale or in different resolution. In general, just keeping with the default settings here works fine. You can give it a number of different anchor points. So we can say scale with the center, scale with the left side, scale with the bottom left side, or whatever. In general, keeping this the way it is, unless you have a very specific reason to change this, and you understand why you're changing it, just keep it at scaling with the center. The moment your game is going to be displayed on a widescreen monitor that's like 21:9, that might become an issue, but my hot tip there is just don't make your game support widescreen and you'll be fine. Nobody's playing on widescreen anyway. Don't worry. Which brings me actually to another thing here, and that is the canvas scaler on the actual canvas object that we added as the first thing. We can select a UI scale mode. We've got constant pixel size, which just respects the actual pixel size of the images that you're putting on your UI. So if your image is 200 by 200 pixels, it's going to be displayed smaller on a higher resolution screen. If it's on a 4K screen, it's going to be really small. If it's on a 720p screen, it's going to be really big. And your UI look is not going to be consistent. It's going to be consistent in its sharpness, not in its size. Then we've got scale with screen size, which means that it's going to stay the same relative size to your canvas, no matter what the resolution is that you're using. And then we've got constant physical size, which don't worry about that one. You're probably not going to use it. So we've got this set to scale with screen size. Your reference resolution, generally speaking, you probably set that to 1920 by 1080. A lot of people might be playing in 4K, which is fine because it will just upscale everything. You can just set this to 4K if you want to. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, all of your objects on here, you can add scripts to as well. So let's see, we can get a key gathered script or something like that to display whether or not this key has been gathered. We can make a public color not gotten and a public color for gotten. Then we also want a reference to our image from Unity Engine UI. It'll automatically add it on top here. If your code editor for whatever reason doesn't do it, in order to reference pretty much everything about UI elements, you're going to need to be using Unity Engine UI. So for being able to reference an image variable, you need to be using that. Let's call that image key. Then in the start function, we can set key to get component image, and then our key.color will be set to not gotten. We can make a public void getKey function, and in that we set the key.color to being gotten. The not gotten color will be a bright red, and the gotten color will be green. Then on our key, we're going to go to our key script that we made a little while ago. And there we'll make a key gathered variable. We'll make that public. This is all part of the things that we've seen before, so I'm rushing through this a little bit. Realistically, you want to do this with Unity events, but we'll make a separate video on Unity events. We'll call that UI keys, and then when we on trigger enter 2D here, we'll say UI key dot got key. I'll actually put that before delete doors, otherwise this script will delete itself before it can run that code. We'll drag on this image to our UI key variable here so that it has a connection to the UI component. And it's a rather dark image, so it's kind of difficult to see, but right now it's got a red coloring to it, and then when we pick up the key we can see it ever so slightly changed to being a green coloring. So in that way we can influence UI elements like any other game object really in the game. The only difference is it has to be on a canvas. Some other things that we can add are UI buttons. So if you go to UI, we've got a button which is part of TextMesh Pro. These buttons have a child object, which we've talked about in the past, child and parent relations, which we can type in any text we want. So press to open doors. And if we go back into the button, we have a on-click event here. And again, we'll talk about events a little bit in the future, but for right now, we can just add something to this list and we can pick any object in our scene. So let's pick up our key, put it in here, and then we can run any function out of any of the components on that object. So we can key open door, and then as long as this function is a public function, we can now see it here in delete doors, which now will, when we press this button, run the same code. You'll note though, maybe not, that the key didn't change color, and that's because it's not actually in that function. It only runs whatever is in this function, and the key changing color is part of the triggering event, not of the actual function to delete the doors. And to round off this video is we're going to add one more thing, and that's going to be a TextMesh Pro. There's two types of text in Unity. There's the old legacy text system that only exists still in Unity to not break old projects. Never fucking use that. We've got TextMesh Pro. It's got a lot more options to it that you can use, and we can, just like normal text, influence this through code as well. So let's add a component and say score counter, for instance, here. And the way we reference the text on the TextMesh Pro is through a TextMesh Pro UGUI variable, which is quite a mouthful. But as you can see, and the reason that I wanted to discuss this is that in order to use that variable type, we need to be using TM Pro. And let's call that score. And let's do the same thing that we did at the start of this tutorial series. Let's make a public int score count. And now we want to set the text in our TextMesh Pro. So we say our score dot text because we want to reference specifically the text. We can change a lot of things about a TextMesh Pro UGUI variable, like its font, like its material, like a lot of different things. So we need to specify that we want to reference the text here, and it already autofills the rest for us. Is going to be equal to our score count, which is our integer, dot to string, so that it can actually be used as a piece of text. Then let's also make a public void increase score with a integer for amount to add, and our score count will plus equals amount to add. This is all stuff that we've been over before. And before this can work, we need to give our score a value of getComponent TextMesh Pro UGUI in the start function. Now let's make a new button again, as we have done before. We go down to UI, we scroll down here to button. In its child object, we go to the TextMesh Pro in there, and we type increase score. Don't worry too much about these arrows that you can see here. That's for navigational purposes if you're using a controller. That's a little beyond what we're doing here right now today. Let's make this button just a little bit larger so that the score text can fit inside of it. Then we go to this button's on click event. We get our TextMesh Pro. We add a action there. We drag our TextMesh Pro over. we check our score counter, script, and go to the increase score, and we increase it by 1. And now you'll be able to see, now we can see our score is 0, and when we press the button, it increases. So that's in a nutshell how building a basic UI works. You make a canvas and you put UI supported elements under that canvas as child objects. You can scale the canvas in a number of different ways. You can give different pivot points to different objects on that canvas, which shouldn't matter as long as your game is being played on a normal 16:9 screen with a reasonable resolution. And we talked a little bit about buttons and the events that come with buttons, which again, we're going to talk about events in a future video through using and making our own for our own objects. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page.